On this episode of Hidden History, boy oh boy do we have a good one for you. As you may know, Afghanistan has recently been taken over by the Taliban that left many surprised and unsure how this whole situation happened. I thought, the U.S. had it under control. They've been in power there for so long. Shouldn't they have just been able to hold on to the whole thing? Well, to understand why not, you gotta understand Afghanistan. And to understand Afghanistan, you should listen to this episode. Ladies and gentlemen, the season finale of Hidden History. Today we're putting the news in context with a full breakdown of Afghanistan for you on today's show. Thanks so much for joining us. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, let's get right into it today. There is a lot of fun stuff to talk about, and we will be getting into all of it. And one of the probably the biggest things that we see today is a lot of confusion, and we're going to try and take it back. And that is one of the things here we do. Some episodes are a little bit more conspiratorial, a bit more, history of empire. But today, it's a history of empire episode, but it's all the more timely, obviously, with what is going on in the news. Yes, we will have a news flash episode for you later today to talk about everything going on up to date now. So during during the Cold War, the U.S. and the Soviet Union, really, it was a Cold War battleground. Afghanistan was. They sought to gain footholds in Afghanistan first through infrastructure investments and then military intervention. Once they withdrew in the late 1980s, the country entered a civil war, backdrop to the rise of the Taliban. And while the U.S. took a backseat in Afghanistan during much of the 90s, it invaded after the 9/11 terrorist attacks in 2001 and undertook a 2-decade project in which the underlying mission would evolve, and that obviously was the previous war in Afghanistan. So we're going to take you through some of the U.S. involvement in history. And a lot of times you see in the media, they date it right back to 2001, post 9/11. That's when we started caring about the world again, because the world really cared about us, all that kind of very much moralizing language. So, what, actually, I think it would pay a little bit to go a little bit further back than just when we started getting involved, but pretty much we'll go through, pretty much history of Afghanistan on speed run. So pretty much what happened was so Genghis Khan, he took it over in the 13th century, but it wasn't until the 1700s the area was united as a single country, because, the thing about Afghanistan you have to understand is there's a lot of ethnic regions. During the 19th century, Britain, looking to protect its Indian Empire from Russia, attempted to annex Afghanistan, resulting in a series of British-Afghan wars, ending in 1921. So the British, they were beleaguered in the wake of World War I, are defeated in the Third British-Afghan War, and Afghanistan becomes an independent nation. Concerned that Afghanistan has fallen behind the rest of the world, the Emir Amanullah Khan began a campaign of socioeconomic reform, beginning with declaring himself king. He launches a series of modernization plans and attempts to limit the power of the National Council, so make it less democratic. They pretty much overthrow him 2 years later, and he has to leave the country. Next king is Zahir Shah. He rules for the next 40 years. He brings a semblance of stability to the country, and, 1 year after, let's just see why. 40 years of stability. 1933 becomes king. 1934, the United States formally recognizes Afghanistan. Wonder if, the U.S. bringing it under its wing had anything to do with the fact that it's been pretty much untouched for 40 years until, the Soviet Union had to start messing around with it. Britain withdrew from India in 1947, creating the predominantly Hindu secular state of India and the Islamic state of Pakistan. The nation of Pakistan also includes a largely uncontrollable border with Afghanistan, so that's going to be something worth watching. The pro-Soviet general Mohammad Daoud Khan, cousin of the king, became prime minister and looked to the communist nation for assistance in 1953, and that, folks, is where we come in. Afghanistan was going through a series of modernizing projects, and this is here in Vox, and it attempted to really build into a modern nation-state under two subsequent leaders. First, King Zahir Shah, and then followed by his cousin who overthrew him, a lot of overthrowing going on. Of course, the president Mohammed Daoud Khan, and it was right in the midst of the Cold War. So a pretty bad time to want to modernize, if you choose to modernize with the wrong people. That is. Both the Soviet Union and the United States were involved in Afghanistan, namely through the infrastructure building. The Soviet Union built what is called the Salang Tunnel, which connected northern Afghanistan to Kabul. They were involved in the United States was involved in the Helmand Valley Project, which is an irrigation and agricultural project, building dams in southern Afghanistan. It had been fueling a significant amount of money, or funneling a significant amount of money from the 50s and the 60s on. Then, of course, we get the military relationship there. So in the 70s, the United States is at first quite hesitant to support any type of military expansion. Daoud Khan starts to ally himself more and more with the Soviet Union. He tries to establish a friendly relationship. These are very famous phrase that he uses when he says, "I feel happiest when I light my American cigarette with my Soviet matches." That really kind of speaks his attempt to, hey, say, these guys, they're in my country, they're two superpowers, why don't I try the very dangerous game of trying to play them off each other for as much as I can possibly get? I don't know, that's certainly one way to go about doing it. You may be in a bit of trouble when you start playing them off each other and they really start colliding with each other, which is, of course, when the military relationship starts in the 70s. Allying with the Soviet Union really makes the United States very, very nervous. Things get worse in 1978 when Daoud Khan is formally overthrown in what's known as the Sour Revolution. So we're getting from a Soviet supporting general, which is, okay, one thing, but, Marxist-Leninist government established, that is not good. Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, women given rights, will to wear whatever they want. Women and girls protecting Afghanistan. George Bush would have loved this thing, right? Oh, no. Wait. His dad probably helped overthrow it. It is very, very funny. It was, by all accounts, the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, a lot more, it's democratic in the name, was, very much a Marxist-Leninist place, wanted to take back control of its resources, which obviously Afghanistan has always had a considerable amount of that and a lot of stuff to do there for many major powers. And of course, just establishing a democratic system that, it's very funny to see what the United States does next about it. So the United States, what they already began to do is funnel money towards some resistance groups. So these groups, they're not going to be progressive because the progressive people are in power. They're going to be more, shall we say, conservative, shall we say, fundamentalist. So it does not have a unified policy here at this time, according to Vox, saying it's not like, okay, we need to start resistance movement to overthrow the communist government. It's more of a muddled approach. There are some, though, in the U.S. government, like former National Security Advisor under Jimmy Carter, is Zbigniew Brzezinski, yes, the father of the Morning Joe lady, who is very interested in getting involved. There are other military leaders who thought if we get involved, that's going to force the Soviet Union to get involved, and so they have a bit of a mixed bag approach, trying again to pull the Soviet Union into their own Vietnam, which is something that really, by all Western accounts, led to their downfall in a big way. So pretty much what happened in 1978, they began to agitate, they began to funnel money to the ISI, beginning our long storied relationship with Pakistani intelligence services. I don't know if they were called the ISI back then, but I believe they are now. So they do agitate a lot. So they were sending money to Pakistan's intelligence. Pakistan was sending money to the resistance, and then that induced a Soviet invasion. The U.S. was actually involved a little before the Soviets invaded. Once they got involved, though, the United States goes really full backing, from meddling and funneling and agitating to outright saying, okay, we need to support the Mujahideen. So, in pretty much, this is the big question. What are the Mujahideen? And we supported them on all different levels. We even made movies that were pretty much devoted propaganda points to support the Mujahideen. Like that was, I'm not sure the exact, oh yes, if anyone is familiar with Rambo 3, that movie is literally dedicated to the brave Mujahideen fighters of Afghanistan, who we backed to invade, the first democratic government Afghanistan, I think, has ever had in the Democratic Republic, the Soviet supported, I guess you could say. More like they just responded to, U.S. aggression because they were obviously agonizing. Pakistan was agonizing before. But yeah, so the Mujahideen is sort of resistance movement that emerges in response to the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. The People's Democratic Republic Party is wildly repressive, which also produces a good deal of resistance. Now we should note that it's also a really let's just remember here for a second that it's also a really good progressive government. It's a government that expands women's rights, extends literacy, it builds agricultural reform in the economy, but at the same time they're disappearing people. There are people who are like, hey, can I finally find a job? And some people who are like, wait a minute, we have healthcare. So obviously we're getting into this kind of quirky Vox talk here. I personally would not go to Vox for my full appraisal of the Democratic People's Republic of Afghanistan or whatever the hell they called it. It's really, I just would not go to them. But I'm sure they probably disappeared some people, but I'm willing to bet if it was a lot like Cuba, where they had to really get people out of their country who were really, part of a U.S.-backed, Western-backed, NATO-backed plot to overthrow the government and stop, Soviet influence. Like, how much of it was necessary to the safety of their country and how much of it was just being cruel and barbaric, we don't know. And I don't know if Vox would be going to it. And it's really what it is. It's up for interpretation. You're gonna have to make your own interpretation on this. So that's probably what you should do. But I love how they're at the point, they disappeared people, but also, they really fixed a lot. But the Mujahideen, they're not a single group. We often talk about the Mujahideen as one group, but there are 4 different types of groups that roughly align as resisting this new oppressive government. The first is more organized. They're the Islamist faction. They're people like Gulbuddin Hekmatar, who is trained to sort of this jihadist ideology. He'd like to see Islamic government. He's a regressive, retrograde, reactionary figure. In fact, even before the Soviet invasion, he carried out a series of horrific acid attacks against women. So yeah, this is again, leader of the Mujahideen, Gulbuddin Hekmatar. Horrific acid attacks against women. This is a very unsavory character, and he happens to be one of the more organized groups, allied with a very more moderate Ahmad Shah Massoud, who's not carrying out any acid attacks. He's not regressive. He's much more interested in the kind of egalitarian vision of Islamic Republic, one with representative rather than autocratic rule, but they work together to stop the People's Republic. So there's also leftists in some part of this who have been, disaffected by the government because leftists always are going to be fighting. But let's take a look at the U.S. involvement here. They aren't just funding Mujahideen. There's an oversimplification that happens to sometimes the discourse, partly as a result of some of what the U.S. is doing, saying we're pretty much just funding everybody. We don't care who. We just want that government that's really making good progress for the first time for Afghan people. We want them out. We don't care who it is. We just want to get them out. Brzezinski, he very proudly pats himself on the back and says, we created the Mujahideen, but he says this after the fact. In reality, when we look at the archives, that's not true. The U.S. exploits the Mujahideen. They definitely use the Mujahideen to their advantage, and they do funnel money through Pakistan's inter-services intelligence, but that money isn't going into the hands of the organized groups of the Mujahideen. Ordinary people aren't receiving training from the CIA or Pakistan's ISI. They're just ordinary people who have guns in their houses, pick up their guns and fight, but unfortunately, the more organized groups are those reactionary elements. It's people like Gulbuddin Hekmatar, who is an Islamist, who is quite dangerous, and who does receive funds and receives forms of training. So it's the people. So as we know, there are people who just do this. They pick up guns and they get involved. But a lot of the organization comes from people, certain centers, certain big figures. Like Hekmatar, and Hekmatar is not something I would want personally. The U.S. someone the U.S. should mess around with, and no one should be messing around with him, and he preferably should not be in power. You even have CIA documents here, there's again a box, that complain that Afghanistans are very hard to train because they operate on a different sense of time. They won't organize in the same way the U.S. military will organize. Anyone who's familiar with Middle Eastern culture, Central Asian culture, or Indian culture knows that if you go to a wedding that says it starts at 7 p.m., it'll start at 9 p.m. They tell the Mujahideen, hey, we're going to start at 0800, and they'll do it on their own time. But it is it is to these more reactionary elements the U.S. allies itself. That is a key point here that they make in the Vox article. So I think it's fair to assume if you're reading it in Vox, it's probably 100 times sharper in real life. In fact, they make some really horrific blunders, folks. The United States, they made some blunders. They just completely didn't mean to make in Afghanistan. One of the things the United States ended up doing is pressures Egypt to release a group of Islamists that it had arrested, and one of the Islamists that was arrested in Egypt is released, and then his name is Ayman al-Zawahiri, who happens to be, second in command of Al-Qaeda. The U.S. inadvertently imports him. We don't have the full picture, so it could have been intentional as an attempt to bolster the Mujahideen by bringing in foreign fighters, but they start to bring in people who are known as the Arab Afghans, or the Arab Mujahideen. These are people from Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood, and they're people from Yemen, and people from Saudi Arabia, and they go on to form Al-Qaeda. So that is a very, very important situation. Let's take a little bit about how the Cold War, the period from when the Cold War ends, and eventually, Soviets, the Mujahideen are successful in getting the Soviets out of Afghanistan, and the Soviet Union and the United States, they eventually sign an agreement, or at least they're guarantors of this agreement, known as the Geneva Accords, technically between the Afghanistan and Pakistan countries, but the United States agrees that they will no longer fund the Mujahideen, or at least that one group of the Mujahideen, the more, organized, radical, and repressive group, and the Soviet Union agrees that they will withdraw. The Soviet Union does formally withdraw. It leaves no real support for its former allies. The government in the United States continues to funnel some money, but, mostly turns away. The result is that within 3 years, the government collapses, and civil war emerges between those old Mujahideen factors, again, some of the leftists, some of the monarists, some of the more hardliners, and so it's that war emerges again between those three factions, who again, like I mentioned, are completely different, but with very different visions. It's in that moment that the United States is not involved, the Soviet Union is not involved, and the Soviet ambassador will actually blast the United States and the Soviet Union and say, we meddled in Afghanistan and stopped paying attention. It's in that language that stop paying attention is really what speaks to ends up happening. So big power vacuum is created here, and all those people the United States supported, these hardliner reactionaries, especially the ones they brought in from Egypt and the Muslim Brotherhood and all that stuff, they ended up forming a little group called the Taliban, who emerged as a completely new actor. They're second generation that grew up in the refugee camps in Pakistan. Of course, Afghans were born into refugee camps, raised in refugee camps, and then arrived fresh on the scene, intervening in the civil war. They're able to exploit it and are able to establish the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan from 1996 to about 2001. And they kind of come in. They're not really part of the Mujahideen, but a lot of the Mujahideen certainly, coalesce around them. So yeah, let's just focus in on those events. So we got the entry of the Soviet Union into Afghanistan on December 1979, prompting Cold War rivals, the U.S., Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and China, to support rebels fighting against the Soviet-backed Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, the Mujahideen that we talked about. So, in contrast to the secular and socialist government who controlled the cities, the religiously motivated Mujahideen held sway in much of the countryside. Besides Rabbani, Hekmatyar, and Mujahideen commanders included Jalaluddin Haqqani, that we talked about that, Rabbani, Hekmatyar, Khan, some of these various factions, and the CIA, that they worked with the Service Intelligence, ISI, Pakistan's CIA, do funnel in people like bin Laden, these Afghan Arabs. After the withdrawal of Soviet military aid from Afghanistan, the PDPA regime under Nabijullah held on until 1992, when the collapse of the Soviet Union deprived the regime of aid. 89 and 92. And when the collapse of the Soviet Union, they deprived the regime of aid. The defection of the Uzbek general Abdul Rashid Dostum cleared the approach to Kabul. Somebody who will come up a little bit later with the political stage. That Dostum name definitely sounds familiar with the relationship to Afghanistan. So what he did is he dipped and, led the way to Kabul. With the political stage cleared of Afghan socialists, the remaining Islamic warlords vied for power, and the United States' interest in Afghanistan had diminished, because no more Soviet Union, and also no more Osama bin Laden. So Rabbani has officially become president of the Islamic State of Afghanistan. He was one of these warlords, but they had to battle the other warlords for control of Kabul. Rabbani's defense minister, Ahmed Shah Massoud, defeated Hekmatyar in Kabul and ended the ongoing bombardment of the capital. He tried to initiate a nationwide political process with the goal of national consolidation. Other warlords, including Ismail Khan in the west and Dostum in the north, maintained their fiefdoms. Mullah Omar, a Pashtun mujahideen who taught in a Pakistani madrasa, returned to Kandahar and helped found the Taliban. His followers were religious students, known as the Talib, and sought to end warlordism through strict adherence to Islamic law. By November 1994, the Taliban had captured all of Kandahar province. They declined the government's offer to join a coalition government and marched on Kabul in 1995. This, of course, leads to Taliban rule. So these were kind of the guys who came in and said, warlords, not only are you ineffective, but you don't even follow the Islamic way. You're corrupt. You're heathens. Get out of there. It's our turn. So what they did here, these Taliban, they had a little bit of a tough ride into Afghanistan. They had a tough road with Massoud and Dostum, these two warlords, creating the Northern Alliance, this united front against the Taliban. The Taliban captured Mazar-e-Sharif in 1998, something that happened again just a few weeks ago, and drove Dostum into exile. It was a really, really brutal conflict, and it was not good at all. Someone was out there, though, proving his chops. So a young head of the 055 Brigade was responsible for mass killings of Afghanistan civilians. The report by the UN quotes eyewitnesses in many villages describing Arab fighters carrying long knives used for slitting throats and skinning people. The leader of the 055 Brigade, his name was Osama bin Laden. By 2001, the Taliban controlled as much of 90% of the country, with the Northern Alliance confined to the country's northeast corner. Fighting alongside Taliban forces were some 28,000 to 3,000 Pakistanis and those friendly guys who we all know and love, our good friends, Al-Qaeda militants. So Taliban take control. Things are kind of chill for about like half, and then boom. The World Trade Center, folks. 9/11, it happened. It wasn't good. The Bush administration announced, this is now in Jacobin, they announced the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan in 2001 as a response to the tragic attacks on September 11th in New York. The declared aims of the war were to A. remove Al-Qaeda from the country, ensure the rights of women and minorities, B. and C. help establish a democratic republic. Very thoughtful. As the United States unleashed its military might on Afghanistan, the Taliban quickly retreated from major cities to allow the Northern Alliance, a coalition of former anti-communist mujahideen, to take power. That's who we just talked about. Neighboring Pakistan, the main ally of the Taliban government, was forced to take an embarrassing policy U-turn to facilitate the war effort. As a new government was installed in Kabul under Hamid Karzai's leadership, both media and policymakers expressed euphoria over the swift victory and promise of a more liberal polity in the region. But wasn't to be. In the United States, meanwhile, months after that, they'd already moved on and were going to Iraq. The threat posed by Saddam Hussein's regime was hysterically exaggerated in order to justify preemptive strikes against the country, showing off America's confidence and ability to export freedom. The most laughable and also demonic statement our country has probably produced since Manifest Destiny, I would say. And of course, exporting freedom, looking big for the rest of the world. In this portrayal, Afghanistan is just another example of the endless success stories from the reconstruction of Europe and Japan in the aftermath of World War II to the Gulf War of 1991 of liberal intervention. Yet, beneath the surface, chaos was germinating across the region. The new Afghan government was an awkwardly woven coalition of warlords, emigre elites, and technocrats from different parts of the world. In 2003, women's rights activist Malala Joya made headlines when she publicly challenged the new rulers of the country, calling them out for their crimes against Afghanis in a Loya Jirga, which is, of course, a grand assembly of these elders. In 2005, Joy was elected as a parliamentarian from the Farah province, and she used her platform to highlight the corruption and violence facilitated by native forces. Unfortunately, critical voices like hers were ignored in discussions on the future of the country, and they contradicted the celebratory tone that pretty much created this good war narrative. Yet, the corruption of Afghan elites who have been brought back into power started percolating in the international media around 2012, when Afghanistan was ranked at the bottom in the kind of Transparency International, I don't know how they do this here, Corruption Perception Index. That's one way of putting it. President Karzai and his family were accused of being involved in murky, corrupt deals with the international organization. One scandal was a cash gift from Iran in 2010 to renovate his presidential palace. His brother, Mahmoud Karzai, was involved in multiple corruption scandals, including running the Ponzi schemes throughout the Kabul bank, leading to its spectacular collapse in 2011. In other parts of Afghanistan, reports of extortion, drug trafficking, and, a really lot of other stuff, and sexual crimes was common, as the international aid entering Afghanistan hardly trickled down to the country's poor. Yet, corruption was not merely an Afghanistan problem, it was part of the design formulated by occupying forces. A New York Times report in 2013 exposed that the CIA was bribing the Karzai government to win favors for its short-term goals, pretty much playing the game in the swampy system they themselves created. The Obama administration remained mum on those explosive allegations, revealing its disregard for economic reconstruction in the country. And it's pretty much at this point been revealed through various reports and things like that these corrupt practices were being fueled by, not fought by, the occupying forces. The credibility of the Afghan Republic kept eroding as the 2014 and 19 elections were marred by widespread accusations of electoral fraud, while Washington was able to cobble together a coalition government with the U.S.-trained academic Ashraf Ghani as president. The increasing tensions within different factions paralyzed the state, and the simmering discontent became fuel for the Taliban insurgents who were biding their time and building support bases in the country's rural hinterlands. Most embarrassingly, Pakistan provided covert support to the Taliban, despite being a frontline state on the U.S.-led war on terror. Now, had they saved face and changed tax to act like they supported the United States fighting against the Taliban? Well, they didn't. They double-crossed you. Its dual role is a result of the deep state's refusal to sever its material and ideological links to the Taliban, despite ostensibly aiding the native coalition. Interesting. In 2001, under General Pervez Musharraf's military dictatorship, Pakistan switched sides because it needed financial support to sustain its debt-ridden economy. Yet even today, Pakistan does not maintain a coherent narrative against the Taliban, and pundits in local media continue to applaud their atrocities in Afghanistan. Not only did the Taliban leadership operate through Pakistani city of Quetta, but it did manage to develop an infrastructure of support among sections of the deep state. The blowback for the country has been severe. Some 70,000 Pakistani citizens have died to the Taliban due to the Taliban insurgency within Pakistan. So they have been burned even by their country's own support. One of the worst incidents of extremist violence was the massacre of school children in the Army Public School of Peshawar in 2014, when terrorists gunned down 144 students. The incident shocked the public and led to popular resolve to fight the Taliban in the country. Yet even then, there remained a distinction between the good Taliban, those carrying out similar atrocities in Afghanistan, and the bad Taliban, which are those targeting Pakistan. In an interview with Al Jazeera, the former chief of the ISI, General Assad Durrani, was asked about the blowback of Pakistan's policies, particularly the APS massacre. He dismissed it as collateral damage and saying literally that morality took a back seat in strategic decisions. Well, that's one way of saying it. The cowardly manner in which the United States chose to withdraw from Afghanistan can only be termed a shameful flight In 2020, the United States invited the Taliban for a round of negotiations in Doha, bypassing their own Afghan government, a move that lent some pretty big legitimacy to the terrorist group. As a part of a peace deal signed in Doha, the U.S. government directed the Afghan government to release 5,000 captive Taliban soldiers. The Taliban was represented in Doha negotiations by its co-founder, Mullah Bahadur, an earlier captive in a Pakistani prison. He was released in the United States' request in 2018 to make the Taliban, quote, partners in peace. The U.S. then announced an abrupt troop pullout, put into effect by the end of July 2021, ended up being August, as they emboldened the Taliban were attacking provincial capitals, and of course, Bahadur looks set to lead the new Afghan government. That's pretty much where we are now. I thought it'd be good to get you in on some of what was going on in terms of the craziness, the imperialism, all the violence, and the interests that have been so big in Afghanistan for so long. This has been the season finale of Season 2 of Hidden History. No word yet if we'll be back for a Season 3, so stay tuned to all our social medias and watch all these episodes. They're great whenever, just so you know. See ya, and thanks for listening.